Hey everyone,
Hey there, folks.
this is Amanda,
And this is Rita.
and you're listening to
I Don't Know Her,
the podcast where we talk about women
And some other
some other folks that you've probably never heard of.
And today you will.
So you have something nice to share, a fun thing.
I do. I was recently had a wonderful conversation with a coworker of mine. We had just gotten off work, and so we were having a chat. And we talked a lot about our traumas. And so then we were like trauma bonding. And then, and then he was like, I need some like positive vibes. So like, tell me something that you feel was like a win this week. And I was like, a win? What do you mean? He's like, yeah, anything. Like, you should have a win almost every day. And I was like, and it took me a minute too, because I don't ever really think about what I'm winning at, I guess, during the day. And so I said, well, I know it sounds weird, but my win was I was able to admit that I was wrong, which I am terrible at.
Oh, same.
It's hard.
It hurts.
It hurts.
It's like physically painful.
Yeah, and I avoid it at all costs.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I will avoid speaking to someone for years.
Okay, Mom.
I know. But that has, I've come to realize now, almost 37, the only person that suffers is me, because I just hold on to that so badly. And it's like, it's just not worth it anymore. So I had hurt somebody's feelings and somebody close to me. And so I spun about it. I thought about it. I stayed up just fretting about it. And I was like, this is not how I want this to go. So I was able to just to suck it up and say, yeah, that was a shitty thing. And I'm sorry. And I was wrong. You don't deserve that. I literally said, I'm sorry I violated our friendship in that way, because it is. And I said, I know it's going to take some time for you to get over that. If you do, or if you don't, that's up to you. And I said, I know that I'm going to have to earn that little piece of trust from you back. So that's something I've never been able to do.
What did they respond? How did they respond, I should say?
They were forgiving. They forgave me. And it's a really close friend of mine, and we didn't speak for like a week.
Which is hard.
Which is super hard.
Like, if we didn't speak for a whole week because we'd had a falling out, that would be
a sad week.
If it was like, oh, we didn't speak for a week because we got too busy, that's different. But
if we knew that we were
and you were around each other, weren't you?
Yes.
Because I think I know who you're talking about.
Yes.
They shall remain nameless.
Yes. And and when I know that I'm wrong and I'm upset, I get very quiet, and I will cut you off, because I need time to process, because if I don't, it'll come out wrong. Yes. Or I'll react in a bad way. So he texted me and he's like, are we all right? And I was like, we're fine. Don't worry about it. I was like, but I just need some space.
We're fine. Don't worry about it. It's never a reassuring text. I don't think you helped.
But that could have been read really wrong.
Yeah, we're fine. Don't worry about it.
I just said I need some space, and then a couple times he was like, hi, and I was like, hey, and that was it. Because I was just so like, I was embarrassed, and I had hurt my friend's feelings, and I just like couldn't even look at him in the face. And I was like, okay, this can't go on forever. I eventually did apologize, and he did forgive me. He actually cried.
Oh.
Yeah. Because he was like, you not talking to me really sucks. Yeah. And then I felt even worse. And I was like, well, it wasn't because I didn't want to. Just I couldn't. Like, my pride got in the way. But I would literally, years ago, probably lose a friendship.
Yeah, you would have just lost that.
Yeah.
And like, well, I guess that's over.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely have matured in that regard as well. I would say that apologizing was something I just really never did. I would avoid it at all costs. And like, I remember getting into some pretty intense arguments and fights with people that I cared about deeply, who were like, why can't you just apologize? You know you were wrong. And I would come up with 1,000 reasons why, yeah, but you were wrong in the following ways. And what that does is like it just continues to separate myself from that person that I love or people that I love. If I'm not willing to say, you're right, this time I absolutely fucked up. I'm really sorry. I shouldn't do that. And I think the first time I actually did realize like I need to just fucking apologize. It was like when I came out the first time.
Ooh.
Like I had worked up in my mind how bad it would feel to apologize for something, and then I actually did it and it didn't hurt. It was better. Like I felt
So
better, the
much
person
better.
felt better. And I was like, oh my God, I think the worrying about the apology was worse than the apology.
Yeah, the twisting over it and it's just like you spiral in your head. And I was trying to play in my head. I'm like, well, it really wasn't that bad. Like,
I was just going to say, I think probably my biggest fault of all is that I will come up with ways that I'm the real victim. Like, okay, yeah, so like I totally shouldn't have said that, but this person did A, B, C, and D to me in the past.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of justified.
Yeah. And I was starting to do that, and I was like, no, girl, you were wrong.
Also, it's like, yeah, they did do those things in the past. And I'm talking to myself, if you still have a problem with those things that person did in the past and you feel like they haven't completely like owned up to that or apologized, then in your apology, you can say, while I was thinking about the ways in which I've wronged you, I realized that I still have some resentment about some things that you did. And give them the opportunity to go, oh, wow, I didn't know that you still were feeling that way about those things. Let me think about how I want to talk about that. You know, you never, if you don't allow people the opportunity to be better for you, they will never be better for you.
Yeah. And I've come to realize too that saying you're wrong and that you're sorry doesn't mean that, you know, what you did was wrong. You're not wrong as an entirety, you know, as a person. And I think that's probably where my head goes most of the time. Like if I'm wrong, then like if I make a mistake, I am the mistake. And that's not how that works.
I think a lot of people feel that way. That's why admitting when you're wrong and apologizing for it is so hard. Because bad people do bad things, right?
Yeah.
We don't have this like concept in our culture where we understand that everyone makes mistakes and it's complicated. And I would, you know, every one of us individually would say we would much rather have somebody admit when they're wrong, commit to being better and move forward than someone who never admits that they're wrong. But yet at the same time, we don't allow for mistakes. We like brush people off and are like, ugh, well, they did this one thing and they're such a bad person because of it. And when you hear that and see that over and over and over again, it makes it feel like, I guess that's how it would be for me too. I can't be wrong. I can't apologize for this thing because then everyone's going to know that I'm a bad person. And it's just not true.
And it also was very hard to me to admit that I hurt somebody that cares about me and I care about them. Because that, like, I've hurt people that I don't really know, and it's easier to like shuck that off.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this was like, oh crap. And it was like probably one of the, I think it was the first big fight that we've had as friends where we didn't speak. And that was difficult to get through. But I'm glad I did it. I consider it a win.
It is a win.
Yeah.
I commit to trying to do better myself. It reminds me of a thing actually I talked to my son about recently. He was like, how do you deal with shame? And I thought about it for a second and I said, I think it depends on what the source of the shame is. If part of the reason you're feeling ashamed is because you know you did something, you have a responsibility in a situation, then you need to hold yourself accountable, whatever that looks like. If it's apologizing to somebody, or if it's making an amends, or fixing something you broke, whatever that is that you are responsible for, that's what's leading to the shame.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's something that's outside of you, like someone made you feel ashamed because of something they did, that requires a lot more work, to be honest.
Yeah.
Because you have to forgive them and yourself.
Very true.
In order to get away from that shame. You have to recognize, like, I didn't have any part to play in that. That was their doing. And yet I still feel bad.
Yeah.
And try to take away the power from that other person.
Yeah.
That's hard.
That's very hard.
It's really, really hard.
That was one thing too, was like when my friend was crying in front of me, I didn't react. Usually I'm very empathetic, and like if someone's crying, I cry because I feel what they're feeling. But like I had done that, and I like had no reaction because like in my head I was like, fuck, like I hurt somebody.
It's also okay if somebody cries and it's because they're feeling emotional over the situation. Like, they need to let that out.
True.
I think another thing we do in like the United States is like every time somebody cries, we want it to go away quickly. Mm-hmm. Stop that.
Yeah, put the fire out.
Stop it. Like, and it goes back to when you're kids and like someone, like let's say you're goofing around with your friends, but somebody gets hurt and they start to cry and everybody's like, oh no, someone's gonna get in trouble. Rita's crying.
Shh, 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 shh. Stop.
And then like you hear mom coming down the stairs. You're like, oh shit, stop crying. And the person's like, it hurts though. And we just have like all of a sudden we just have this like, everything's gonna go really wrong now because someone's crying. And it's like we just have to be, I think, work harder at embracing that it's okay to just fucking cry.
Yeah.
And it's okay when other people cry.
Yeah. Yeah, I got like that fear of like, it was exactly, I was like,
Mom's
oh no. Oh no.
I'm in trouble now.
Exactly.
Well, I feel good. I feel like that was another good therapy session.
I know. Getting better at that. Are we ready?
And then I'm going to take us into the depths of hell.
Oh, God.
No, not
Am I
really.
going to cry?
No, you're not.
Okay.
I think you know who I'm talking about today because you, like me, are a true crime aficionado.
I am, but not like you.
And it's got its roots in some true crime stuff.
Okay.
I'm going to talk about Madalyn Murray O'Hair.
That sounds familiar. Detective?
No.
No?
The most hated woman in America.
Ooh.
Does
Okay.
that ring any bells?
Mm-mm.
Okay. So just to preface this, Madalyn became famous as basically America's atheist, the face of atheism. And there's a reason for that, which we'll get to in her story. But the reason why I say that she's more well known now as a true crime story because of her death. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on her death because if you're interested in that part of her story, there are lots of true crime podcasts out there that will handle that. I want to talk about why she was considered the most hated woman in America, which was well before her death.
I know who you're talking about now. Yes.
Okay. So you probably know a lot about her death. Or at least some about her death.
The wild circumstance. Yes.
But I realized, like, I knew who she was. I'd seen the Forensic Files episode. I'd heard podcast episodes about her. I had seen, like, other true crime documentaries on it.
There was a movie made about her.
Yeah, there was a Netflix movie called The Most Hated Woman in America. And then one day, Abby and I were sitting around and we turned on, we have Discovery Plus, which I recommend to everybody. If you're going to get another streaming one, this is it. It's got everything you could ever want. And they had this Vanity Fair confidential show. And they do a really nice job at telling some stories that are pretty interesting. And they go into lots of depth. And that one came up and I was like, oh, I already know all this. You know, this is that so-and-so, you know what I'm talking about. And Abby was like, no, I don't really know. So she had never heard the story. So then we were watching it and like all of the other times that true crime stuff talks about her, they kind of breeze past. They give you the highlights of why she was so famous. And then they go into the murder and the investigation and stuff like that. And I was like, wait a minute. Why don't I know more about what she really did? So that's why I decided to talk about Madalyn Murray O'Hair.
Interesting.
Madalyn Mays was born on April 13th, 1919 in Pittsburgh.
P-burg.
To parents John and Lena Mays, and she was baptized into her father's Presbyterian church. It was hard to figure out exactly what her family situation was like, because she would sometimes talk about her youth as being like, oh, they were this like well-off family. They had all these riches. Everything was fine and great for her. But her biographers have done some like research, and they're like, I'm not so sure that that's true. I think she might have exaggerated some things. But either way, it was probably likely that they were relatively middle class until the stock market crash in 1929.
Oh, no.
Right?
Yeah.
When everybody basically lost their wealth.
Everything, yeah.
And her family was one of them. So they moved to Rossford, Ohio, and she graduated from the local public high school there. And she married a man named John Henry Roths, not right after high school, but within the next 3 to 4 years. The couple both enlisted in the armed forces during World War II. He served in the Marines, and she was in the Women's Army Corps.
Really?
Corps.
Could you imagine both of you like signing up? That's intense.
Yeah, right. I think, based on her personality and the things that I've seen and watched and read, I think she must have been extremely fiercely independent from the start. Very like loud, outspoken, not afraid of anything. And as somebody who was like that when I was younger, you have a couple of choices. You either lean into that or you shy away from it because people don't like it. And they let you know.
Yeah.
So she was actually in the WAC, the Women's Auxiliary Army Corps, and very successful at it. She was actually sent to Italy, and she worked as a cryptographer. Those were the people who were like decoding and deciphering messages being sent back and forth across other countries. So she was helping in the army, but she was like always up for a challenging intellectual conversation. And she began hanging out with an officer named William J. Murray, who was married. He was also a Roman Catholic. And when Madalyn returned, she was like obviously madly in love with this guy. She returned to the U.S., divorced her husband, found she was pregnant with William's child.
Oh, shit.
She wanted him to get divorced from his wife and marry her, but he refused. Part of it is that he said he was Roman Catholic and they didn't believe in divorce, but there's probably all kinds of reasons.
They believe in affairs.
Right, exactly. I was like, I don't think that's okay either. And, now you're just not going to be part of this child's life? Okay.
Okay. Sounds really like God's plan. Okay.
It seems like she was really desperate to be married to him, or maybe it was just the times, because she gave birth to him in 1946.
Okay.
But at some point, she changed her name to Madalyn Murray, which is the officer's last name.
Yeah.
Even though they were not married.
Okay.
And when she also created a birth certificate for him and named him William J. Murray III.
Okay. So maybe to like save face?
I couldn't tell if it was like, when you go to enroll your kid in school, you have to give them a birth certificate.
Yeah.
So if the mother and father's names were not the same as the child's name, you would know they were a quote unquote bastard child, an illegitimate child. So that could be one reason. Also, it seems she really wanted him to marry her.
Yeah.
So she took his name anyway. It was a little odd.
It's a little odd.
And she actually had her son baptized Presbyterian as well. She ended up going to Ashland University, which was in Ohio. She actually attended like the University of Pittsburgh and the University of Toledo. So she had a little bit of college here and there, but she actually completed a degree, her bachelor's degree at Ashland in 1949. And this was interesting because this college was actually associated with the Church of the Brethren. It's not something I'm familiar with, but because of that, the college required 2 years of Bible study for every student. And Madalyn claimed that was like her top class. She was really good at it. But she also later said that, in order to refute something, you must know it.
Oh, interesting.
So, she was a smart chick. Her family was not doing very well financially at this time. And so she convinced them to move with her to Houston, where she was going to get a law degree at the South Texas College of Law. I find the family situation a little different. It's like when we think about family, I was like, oh, you mean her and her child?
That's what I was thinking, but no, this is like her.
Her parents, her brother, her, and her son.
Like, why would they all need to go?
I don't know.
Okay.
I find the situation a little odd, I have to say. Because this is not the first time. It's like, oh, the whole family. Okay.
I wonder if they were dependent on her for something or vice versa.
Yeah,
both ways.
She's a student.
Yeah.
She does work as a Department of Corrections officer while she's going to college to be a lawyer.
Wow.
She graduated in 1952 with what was the equivalent at the time of a JD. It was called an LLB, but now it's called a JD, which is a Juris Doctor. But she never took or passed the bar exam in order to practice law, so she never actually became a lawyer.
Okay.
Part of that is that the South Texas College of Law wasn't like licensed or whatever to give the bar exam, so she couldn't take it.
Okay.
But it was used against her later on as like proof that she was not smart, that she didn't pass the bar exam. And it's like, well, I don't know that she ever
didn't
tried.
even take it.
The family actually moved to Baltimore in 1952, and they bought a little row house in a middle-class neighborhood. And this is where Madalyn's journey starts to sort of flourish and leads to this title of the most hated woman in America. She has another affair with a man named Michael Fiorillo, and she has another son out of wedlock.
Is he married, that man?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I don't think so. But they don't get married for whatever reason. I think she wanted to get married to him and he was like, nah, I'm good.
She keeps finding these cold feet.
I know, but I also am like, she seems like, it seems like you would not marry her, you would marry the whole family.
Oh, God.
So, maybe
it was like a little bit too much.
So her second son is named John Garth Murray. Again, she names that child Murray. And he was baptized into the Methodist Church. So by this point, Madalyn is dipping her toes in political waters. She's joined groups like the Americans for Democratic Action and then decided they weren't liberal enough or progressive enough. And then she joins the Socialist Labor Party. And she was very anti-conservative on many levels already, believing that conservative Christians especially were not living by their so-called teachings because they were not taking care of the poor. I would have to agree.
Yes.
It's difficult to figure out exactly when Madalyn's journey to atheism really began. I think she liked to tell some tall tales at times. So in one of the things that she wrote that her journey started when she was 12, that she read the Bible cover to cover and then found it completely deplorable because it was full of like hatred and revenge and rape and like, and then she was like, and it was poorly written.
Oh my God.
And I have to agree with all of the above. I remember the first time I read it cover to cover, which was probably about the same age. I was like, what is this? There's so much nastiness in there.
Yeah, if you go in deep, you're like, this
people are bad.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot of hope in it. It's nasty. So she was like, this is what everybody believes? What the fuck? She's like 12 years old and she's like, Mom, this? So that was the story she tells. It's hard to decide if that's true though, because she did get both of her sons baptized.
Yeah.
So, like, was she an atheist at 12?
I mean,
maybe
the seed was planted.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought. The seed has been planted. She also says that it was like she had called herself like a humanist or something like that for a while. And it wasn't until she was in the army and she was having one of those like rousing debates with somebody that they were like, "Oh, you're an atheist." And she had never heard the term before.
Oh.
And so after that, she was like, "Yeah, that's exactly what I am. I know what that is."
If she didn't even know the term, then probably didn't know,
Yeah. So she didn't know what an atheist was. And then after that, she was like, "I'm an atheist." I don't know. I'm like, maybe it was just always evolving. Mm-hmm. Like, I think a lot of people are. But it started to take shape in the mid-1950s. Because this is the time in America when we have McCarthy and McCarthyism.
I was like, McCarthyism.
Where in America, if you weren't conforming, then you were a communist.
Yes.
You were a no good commie.
Word du jour.
Yes. And so she, it's like she was always kind of a rebel. And I think she was looking around and being like, I'm not like any of this shit. She also called herself a rabid feminist, which I disagree with, but whatever. But like she was, and I think part of that is that she was like talking about like, I have more worth than just what they want us to be in this society. And there's also like some family lore because her son, William Murray Jr. or William Murray III or whatever, he said that during this time, she also tried to become a Soviet citizen, but there's no actual like proof of that really. It seems like it's probably just
kind of some icing on the cake.
Yeah, because she said they were just on vacation in Paris, but like there is some documentation that she wrote to the Soviet embassy. So it's not really clear, but anyway,
okay.
She may have tried to defect to the Soviet Union. In 1959, Madalyn enrolled her son, William J. Murray III, who we're going to refer to as Bill.
Okay.
Madalyn enrolled Bill in Woodburn Junior High. It was a public junior high school in Baltimore. On the first day, as she's walking him in to like enroll him, she saw that students were saying the Pledge of Allegiance and reciting the Lord's Prayer. And she was immediately upset, and she confronted the administration and was told like, I don't know, it's what we've always done. Mm-hmm. This is just what we do. And she was like, well, it's unconstitutional. You can't have prayer in public school. And she was stewing over that, and she was like, every student, regardless of their religious background or their lack of religion, is required to pray in a public, federally state-funded school when the Constitution has the Establishment Clause in it, which is where it explicitly states that there should be no law respecting an establishment of religion. And she was like, this is a violation of the Establishment Clause to have prayer in public school. So it seems like for a long time, all she did was like complain about it, like at the administration, at the teachers, at the school board.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's how it starts because like you have to voice that that's an issue. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then it's when you get heated enough where you're like, okay, let's rubber hit the road.
And that's actually because of her son.
Really?
Yeah, her son is the one who pushed her to action. He said to her, either you believe in something and you act on those beliefs, or you believe in something and you don't act on those beliefs. In the first case, you have character, and in the second case, you're a hypocrite.
Whoa. Them's fighting words.
Yeah, and she was like,
you're right.
Okay, son, you're right. And they decided to do something about it. So Bill, 14 at the time, and Madalyn hatch a plan, which would eventually become a very lengthy legal battle that basically changed the state's and the nation's view of separation of church and state in schools. Mm-hmm. The plan was that Bill would go to school, and his mother would call and say that Bill was no longer going to read the Bible or say prayers, and that if the school didn't permit him from opting out, she would pull him out from school. The administration responded that he would have to at least attend the services, stand, bow his head, mouth the words of the prayer. Later, the assistant superintendent said that he could remain seated in respectful silence, but that was not going to suit either of them.
No, If he doesn't want to be there, he doesn't have to be there.
Yeah, he shouldn't have to be compelled to participate in any way. And so she pulled him out of school. The ACLU was like, don't do that. Because then they have a case that he's just a truant, like, no good little fucker.
Okay.
So the school was like, if you do this, we're going to charge Bill with truancy. So Madalyn wrote a letter to the editor of the Baltimore Morning Sun and told them everything that was going on. They did not print it, and instead, a couple days later, they sent a photographer and a reporter to their house.
Oh, wow.
To take photos of them, and basically made this into a big story about this mother and son that were trying to take down prayer in schools. And as you know, like, how stories went viral in the 50s, I don't know, but like basically went viral. It was getting the attention of larger media, like,
yeah,
you know, the AP.
mean, it's a good story. I mean, and it's going to be one of those that gets everybody is going to have an opinion.
Mm-hmm. Well, and she was so very outspoken about it. It wasn't like she was like, you know, I just wish that they would have some options for kids who don't practice. She was like, the Bible is garbage. It's sadistic. We don't believe in it. It doesn't belong in schools. She was not having it. And she really did say stuff like that.
Yeah.
She really was like, it's an abominable piece of shit. The Bible doesn't belong anywhere near my child. She loved to use 4-letter words. We're actually going to watch a clip of her talking about that.
Yes.
When Madalyn eventually did file a lawsuit against the school district, one of her claims was that Bill was being forced to participate. So the school wanted to prove that he wasn't being forced to participate.
Okay.
So they came up with their own sneaky plan. Obviously, in order for the lawsuit to go forward, he had to be in school.
Yes.
Right? So she had to send him back to school. And they knew that if they compelled him to participate, she would have a case on her hands.
Mm-hmm.
So when he returned to school, as soon as he walked through the doors, he was escorted directly to the principal's office. And then the principal would sit down and chat with him for a while. Like, hey, tell me about your stance. Why are you doing this? Blah, 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 blah. Explain it to me again. And then after a certain amount of time, the principal would escort him to homeroom. And of course, by the time he got there, the morning exercises were done.
Okay.
So he wasn't compelled to participate in them because he wasn't there.
Okay.
And day after day.
I was going to say, they're going to do that every day?
They did it every day. Every single day. And so one day, William, was very determined.
Mm-hmm.
He went through a back door in the school, snuck around, hid in the bathrooms, did all this shit. Walked in as soon as the class started into his homeroom. The teacher ignored him. And then, as usual, she begins to read from the Bible. William stands up and he says, I object to this. I don't want these teachings. And he walks out of the room. And this meant that he had officially challenged the district and they would be forced to respond. Life at school for Bill, as you might imagine, was hell.
Yeah.
You can imagine.
The kids are terrible.
Kids are already shitty.
Yeah.
And now you're doing this thing that everybody condemns. So he was being taunted and ostracized. He was beat up a lot. He was called a commie. At one point, a group of boys they pushed him in front of a bus and he was nearly hit and killed.
Oh my God.
The school's response, because Madalyn was like, well, you got to do something about this. My child matters. The school's response was to isolate him. He was only allowed to use the front doors. He wasn't allowed to go to the school library. He wasn't allowed to have study hall. He was not allowed to go to the cafeteria for lunch. Instead, he had to go home for lunch. So they
just making it harder and harder.
And she was like, you can't isolate him. That's not how that works.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually they allowed him to return to lunch, but he was required to eat alone at his own table, at a special table that they set up just for him.
Jeez.
So obviously, imagine being a child
mm-hmm.
and that's what your life is. It would be fucking miserable.
A nightmare.
The school had countered her lawsuit with a truancy claim in court, and the only way William and Madalyn's case could go forward is if he completed all of his makeup work so he was no longer truant.
Mm-hmm.
The Murrays claimed that William was doing his work and turning it in, but often his teachers would say, I don't know what happened to it. You never turned it in. And he'd have to redo all of his work again. And it was so bad that they started carbon copying his assignments at home to prove that he'd done them.
Jeez. I can't believe adults would do that. I would hope that they wouldn't.
I just gave
their face.
Rita this look that was like, seriously? Really? I mean, think about these parents that are protesting masks right now.
You're right. You're right.
I don't know if I shared this, but the first day of school in our high school, there were students who were walking around with lanyards that had red laminated cards on them that said mask exemption. And teachers were like, oh, I didn't know. And like, we're like, I'm sorry, I didn't know you were exempt or whatever. And our principal had to send out an email that was like, there is no such thing.
Jeez.
These are parents who made them.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sent their kids out like that. So disrespectful. So can I believe that adults do these things?
Yes.
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Their home was also attacked. Communist was painted across the like alley from them. Their cars were vandalized. Their windows were smashed. They even found a bullet in one of their cars, like in the door. The harassment also trickled down to little John Garth, who was in elementary school. He didn't have any friends, and he was harassed at school. So Madalyn got him a kitten.
Mm. Oh, no.
Trigger warning. They found it dead on their front porch because somebody had strangled it.
Oh, my gosh.
And when Madalyn went to the police and to the courts for protection, it was like falling on deaf ears. So we're like, huh, what? Yeah, we'll send somebody around. We'll send somebody to come check on you. But it was like not going well.
Mm-hmm.
It took forever before they finally had a patrolman come swing by, and that was only occasionally. And they did take those kids to court who tried to push him in front of the bus.
Yeah.
And the judge lectured the boys and told them to shake hands and then dismissed the case. So.
That's so fucking awful. It's like you almost killed him.
Yes. You got to lecture and you have to shake hands. Like, I don't agree with like kids being sent to jail or whatever, but it seems like also hold them accountable for almost killing someone.
Yeah.
I don't know. There's got to be a happy medium there.
Mm-hmm.
And Madalyn still wasn't shying away from talking to the press, hence the reason why people were retaliating. Like, if it had fallen out of the press, people would have forgotten about it.
Mm-hmm.
But she's making sure it's still in the press. And actually, people started, because she was experiencing all of this really terrible stuff, and they were like having their home vandalized and things like that, donations started to pour in to them to help with her case. And she eventually formed a nonprofit corporation called the Maryland Committee for the Separation of Church and State. And she was writing and sending out a newsletter called The Murray Case so that people could stay updated on what it was about. But it was kind of a clever way to make money also.
Okay.
Because people would subscribe to the newsletter, so they'd have to pay for it. And of course, she probably did need some money to pay for all of these damages and things. Like, she couldn't work. Like, every time she got a job, they would like realize who she was and they'd fire her. So, I mean, she did need the money, that's for sure. But it does set up a pattern of behavior, I'll say.
Okay.
Where she solicits donations from folks.
Okay.
Meanwhile, the FBI opened a file on her, compiling information on everything she wrote, said, and did, because that's the time it was.
My gosh, she's an aggravator.
Yes. In 1962, the case was appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. So it kept getting, they lost at every level. And so they kept appealing until the last place they can go is to the Supreme Court. And there was a similar case making its way through the Pennsylvania court system called Schempp versus the Abington School District. And the two cases got combined by the Supreme Court. They were like, you have such similar things. It's going to become one case. And it's actually the Schempp case, not the Murray case. Because of that, like the Schempp case, I don't know, came first.
Okay.
For whatever reason. But they were put together. When the arguments were presented before the court, the attorneys for the states of Maryland, which is Madalyn's case, and Pennsylvania, which is the Schempp case, said that the Bible and the Lord's Prayer weren't religious activity.
In what way?
No, they were just teaching moral principles.
Okay.
Do you agree?
Not really.
And the Baltimore superintendent said that there were fewer disciplinary problems because of these morning exercises. They're like, oh,
really?
kids behave better because they have morning prayer.
Okay.
And they were reading actual Bible verses. Like, the teachers would read kids' Bible verses. Mm-hmm. This is wild to me, I have to say. I know you went to school in a Catholic school.
Yeah. So it was just like I'm trying to imagine, like, I'm trying to put myself in those shoes. But it's like, you can't, that's a lie. You're
Right.
lying.
You cannot say that it is not religious.
Exactly.
So the justices, because when you take somebody to the Supreme Court, the justices get to drill you. And so the justices in this case really drilled the shit out of these attorneys to the idea that there were fewer disciplinary issues because they said these morning prayers and stuff.
Yeah.
Justice Stewart asked why the schools didn't just use tranquilizers.
Oh my God. Yeah, you bring up a good point.
Justice Black countered that if 3 minutes of prayer was so effective, why didn't they just read the Bible and pray all day to ensure such fine morals? Right? Like,
right.
If it works for 3 minutes, you should do it all day.
Yeah.
Justice Douglas, who's my fave, asked why students didn't read the Quran.
Hey, there you go.
They also pointed out that if the instruction is moral and not religious, then students would be compelled to attend it. Right? If it's moral teachings and not religious teachings, then the students have to stay there.
Yeah. That's a really good point.
And that would be compulsory religion in school. Mm-hmm. So you do have a problem there. And I thought that was a really smart point to make.
Very.
On June 17th, 1963, the Supreme Court returned their verdict by an 8-1 margin. They declared the required Bible reading and prayers in school unconstitutional because it violated the Establishment Clause in sponsoring religion in public schools. So that obviously changed a lot in the United States. At the time, the New York Times reported that 41% of public schools had some kind of Lord's Prayer and or Bible readings every day. So that affected a lot of schools.
Yeah, that's almost half.
And a lot of places like vowed to fight it. Like, George Wallace in Georgia. What a fucker that guy is.
Yeah.
But it all failed every time. Every time somebody tried to go up against it, it failed because this is a very resounding decision by the courts.
Yeah, and it's violating the Constitution. Like,
it absolutely is.
Yeah, there's no way that you can get away with that.
No, you cannot. With this victory, Madalyn was then catapulted into the national spotlight even more, and she took great advantage of it. She was known for being loud, crass, rude, and everything a woman was not supposed to be, which meant she was a media darling. In fact, Phil Donahue put her on
the Dawn.
He put her on his very first episode of his talk show. She was his very first guest.
Really?
In 1967. And it caused such a furor that he was going to have her on that he lost his sponsors But all of them returned when the episode hit the airwaves and millions of people tuned in.
Wow.
Yeah. But life in Baltimore sucked for the family. It was violent and hostile, as you can imagine. So they relocated to Honolulu, Hawaii.
Oh, that's a really nice place to relocate.
Around this time, I think probably partially from all of the stress, she'd been having some pretty bad health issues.
Okay.
She'd actually, during the time that the court case was making its way through the courts, she had been hospitalized after a hysterectomy complications for 5 months.
Oof.
Like, shit was not going well. And she also she'd been diagnosed with diabetes at some point. She definitely had some stuff going on. And one of the reasons why she left Baltimore, and I couldn't find the police reports that really went into this, and it's hard because people really hate her, so it's really hard to find unbiased information. But allegedly she got into an altercation where she assaulted 5 Baltimore police officers.
That's a lot.
Yeah, I mean,
Maybe.
She's just one woman, but I guess I could see it. And it was because her son, Bill, had impregnated his high school girlfriend, and they had a child together named Robin. And I guess she was threatening to take the child away or something. And Bill and the mother of Robin were both heavily involved in drugs and alcohol in ways that were very dangerous and not great for this child.
Oh.
And she went to get the child out of the situation. And I guess the cops were like, you can't take the child. I don't know. Anyway, it turned into a very big domestic dispute. Eventually, she was granted custody of Robin and adopted her.
Okay.
So she was no longer her granddaughter, but her daughter. She raised.
So Bill kind of went to the wayside, huh?
Oh, yeah. And
Okay.
I was like, he was 14 when this stuff started, and he was 20 by the time it ended.
Yeah.
He was fucked up
Yeah.
by it. His whole teenage years. I mean, teenagers, it's hard already.
Yeah. Let alone being a national news sensation.
Yeah, and it was the 60s.
Yeah.
I mean, it was just not a good time.
That is a whirlwind.
Yeah, it was a rough time for him. So she adopted Robin, and they moved to Hawaii, and the family was all together again. Again, her mom, by this point, her dad had actually died, which she blamed on the violence and stuff, because it was one of the nights when somebody attacked their house.
Okay.
He'd had a heart attack. So she blamed these people. She was like, I blame the Christians.
Whoa.
And she's not wrong.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's who was, pelting your house with stones. Which is ironic. Ye who cast the first one, right? And they went to Hawaii, and she had her mom with her brother Irv,
Yeah.
her son John Garth, who I'll just call Garth, and her daughter Robin. They're all together in Hawaii, but Bill is not there, and the two of them become greatly estranged over time. He eventually joins AA and Alcoholics Anonymous.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not a huge fan, as I've talked about on the show before. He converts to evangelical Christianity through AA.
Wait, is he the Bill?
Yeah.
In California who started that huge AA chapter?
I don't know. He did become president of a group called the Freedom for Religion to counter his mother.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, in 1980, when they split for good, she remarked to the press something like, I guess it's called a postnatal abortion.
Oh my God.
She's like, I never want to see or speak to him again. He's a disgrace.
Oh my God.
He's dead to me.
Yikes. Okay.
When I say that she is I get why people hated her. She is mean. She is dreadful as a human. So, in fact, he wrote a book about her and his journey to becoming a Christian preacher. And he talked about like growing up that the family was pretty volatile. Like she yelled a lot, and her and her parents didn't get along very well because her parents were still Christian.
Mm-hmm.
And they just they disagreed with her on her like tactics, but they agreed, like they wanted to support the cause.
Mm-hmm.
They supported her and like her work, but they did not agree with her.
Mm-hmm.
And it caused a lot of animosity in the family. So he grew up like with a lot of yelling, a lot of aggression happening.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say where the truth is. It's like, I don't know if I trust what Bill has to say about his mom because of that Christian, like he's an evangelical, which is like, they're bad. I don't like them.
They're a little loopy.
Like, you know what I mean? Like they're not known for being level-headed,
No.
let's say.
They are extreme.
But then also other people are like, yeah, she was really loud and abrasive and demanding. And I'm like, also like, how much is this is rooted in sexism?
Mm-hmm.
So I'd like to hear what you have to say. I'm going to share a couple of clips of Madalyn on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson.
Okay.
So I'm going to give you two clips. The first one is her talking about 4-letter words. And since we've had conversations about that on the show, I figured that would be apt.
I have a reputation for the use of the 4-letter word, and I want to talk about the use of the 4-letter word tonight, primarily because my husband is watching this show, and I want to tell him why I have been doing this also. I use 4-letter words exquisitely, delightfully, deliberately, and abundantly whenever they need to be used, and I very rarely scatter these pearls before swine. That was low, wasn't it?
Yes, that's a sneaky one.
That was a sneaky one. I use these speeches at colleges and universities, and I'm generally paid, up to $3,000 to go into the colleges and swear. This is because we take seriously separation of church and state, and the whole issue of obscenity has to do with separation of church and state. I simply am not going to let the church tell me, not alone what to wear. I can't be nude. I'm not going to permit the church to tell me what I'm going to eat, fish on a certain day, for instance, for a long while. I'm not going to permit the church to tell me how many children I'm going to have because of the information which is available on birth control. And I'm not going to let the church take certain words, which are vital, and charge them, put a charge on them, that those words really do not have.
Well, she's definitely compelling.
She is.
Yeah.
I love the way she talks about 4-letter words. What are your overall first impressions?
She didn't look like how I thought she was going to look. I thought she was going to be like a lot older for some reason. I don't know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she was born in 1919, so this is sometime in the late 60s or early 70s, I believe.
I think she definitely likes to hear herself talk.
Oh yeah, this is a 22-minute segment.
Oh my gosh.
And I think Johnny Carson maybe speaks. Total, if you added it up, maybe 1 minute of that.
I could see how she could get under some especially men's skin.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, because how dare she?
It's interesting when she steps out on the stage, no one claps.
Really?
Ooh, it's awkward. Like watching this whole segment, it was very awkward. It was hard to watch.
Yeah, but she's out there. She's still there. Like, takes guts.
I could not imagine. I couldn't do it.
And all because she just wants this, she wants to uphold the Constitution, or is it because of her approach to the situation? Like, is it her that they all just hate, or what she's actually doing, or both, or
it's all
of it?
And she's loudly talking about atheism. Not just like, hey, I believe that, there are people of multiple faiths and people without faith, and we shouldn't have just Christianity always around us. Like, she's like, no, she absolutely adamantly believes no religion belongs in any part of like public life that's funded by taxes. But also, she loudly and vehemently does not like religion and talks about it and promotes atheism.
Interesting.
So I'm going to show you another clip from this segment. And this is about, she kind of moves really stealthily from prayer in schools to church taxation.
Okay.
Why are people so emotional? Why do they put the battleground in the public schools and become so emotionally involved when people say, you mean they're not going to permit our children to start their daily schedule with a non-denominational prayer? Their argument, of course, is how can it affect anybody? It can't hurt.
Well, there is no such a thing as a non-denominational prayer because vis-a-vis the world, Christianity, for instance, is a sect. And if we would have suddenly the Muslims or the Hindus take over and every person be required to say a prayer to Allah, there would be as much alarm and as much up in arms as there is now from the fact that we would like to have the public schools and the secular community to be neutral. We believe that religion is a private affair. Everybody has a right to have their religion. They have a right to have their churches. They have a right to have their schools. They have a right to have their institutions. But we feel one thing: they should pay for all of them. They shouldn't ask for special tax favors, and they shouldn't ask for taxpayers' monies. They can own their banks and their oil companies, and they can own their stocks and bonds, of which they really own hundreds of millions of dollars. That's their business, but they should pay tax on the income from all of that. They shouldn't take advantage of our generosity in dealing with religion and say, all right, we'll see that you get skinned.
Excuse me, don't you find that many...
Going for the jugular on that one.
I actually tend to agree with her. I don't believe that that churches should be allowed to be exempt from taxes if they're making a ton of money.
Yeah.
That seems corrupt in every possible way.
Yeah.
And if you need proof of that, I would direct everyone to the Church of Scientology.
Oh my gosh, yes.
Which owns tons and tons of land and buildings in Los Angeles, which has one of the highest homeless populations in the country.
Mm-hmm.
And most of their properties are like condo buildings, apartment buildings, where 50% or more sit empty.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's the way they like it. And then they don't pay taxes on any of it.
And that's insane.
It should not be allowed. And when she was talking about like owning your oil refineries and your oil fields and your banks and stuff, that's real. Like I thought she was exaggerating or incorrect or something like that. And then I
would totally believe that. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Like for instance, the Knights of Columbus,
mm-hmm.
which is a religious organization, they own the land that Yankee Stadium is on.
Holy shit.
Yeah. So
I didn't know that.
Every time you pay a ticket to go see the Yankees play, that portion of that goes to the Knights of Columbus.
Holy crap.
A religious nonprofit.
No taxation.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Does that seem right?
It doesn't. And that's how, yes, things get corrupt.
Yeah, it does corrupt a lot of stuff. So I don't necessarily agree with her methods, but I agree with a lot of what she has to say.
The logic behind it, yes.
Unfortunately, she just is like, she's like a bulldog, which I think is admirable sometimes, and then other times it's like, cool it.
Like, it's a delicate line. Like, because like I said, the logic is and her speaking is very compelling, but do you want to lose these people? You know, you don't want to be going so hard that you get people walking away from you and not really listening, because she does have something to say.
Yeah. I think that's the tough thing about her, is that at one point there was somebody who said, like, I just wish she wasn't the face and the mouthpiece of the atheist movement, because she's not logical. She's all of these things, and she's logical in terms of like her arguments, but
mm-hmm.
like even that stuff about like the 4-letter words and getting paid $3,000 to swear on college campuses, like that's not, that rubbed me the wrong way.
She was a little braggy, you could see on her face.
But it's also like, that's not why you're being paid to be there. You're not being paid to go swear.
Yeah.
You're being paid to talk about your ideas about the separation of church and state. And maybe she was trying to make a joke, but it didn't come across funny.
Mm-hmm.
Came across as weird and rude.
Yeah.
So in 1964, so she keeps pursuing, in addition to these media appearances, and she does a lot of them. Like she's on Johnny Carson more than once, I think at least 2 or 3 times. Phil Donahue at least 2 or 3 times.
Okay.
She's always on television. She's always on the radio. She's still pursuing legal cases. So I'm going to tell you about a few of them. In 1964, she sued the FCC, that's the Federal Communications, that they should be giving atheists equal time on radio and television to religious programs. She sued President Nixon over his weekly religious services in the White House. She went after NASA and the astronauts for reading the Bible on their flights. In 1977, she challenged opening city council meetings with prayer in Austin, Texas. And a year later, she sued to remove "In God We Trust" from the U.S. currency. In 1978, she sued the state of Texas. Because,
the entire state of Texas?
Yes, because their constitution required that all public officials sign a document saying they believed in God.
Oh, that's not right.
Right. She also sued the Pope. Well, actually, she sued the national parks because when the Pope held Mass in D.C., he held it on the National Mall, which is a national park.
Okay.
In 1980, she sued to remove a nativity scene from the Capitol building in Austin, Texas. And finally, she was part of a lawsuit that challenged employing unordained chaplains at tax-funded hospitals. Like being paid full-time salaries to be chaplains at a tax-funded hospital.
Yeah.
Some of these were successful. She was actually able to remove the requirement that public officials believe in God, that they have to sign a document. That had a huge impact, honestly. And some were not. Literally, most of the other things she lost.
Okay.
She also founded, so originally, I told you she had that nonprofit and she was sending out like the newsletter about her case. Eventually, she like parlayed that into starting an organization called the American Atheists. And their mission was, quote, to defend the civil rights of non-believers, work for the separation of church and state, and address issues of First Amendment public policy.
Okay.
She at one point said that there were like 25,000.
I was just thinking that. I was like, I wonder what the numbers were.
Yeah, it looks like, or actually, no, I think she said there were like 40,000 people that were counted among their ranks, but it's probably that paying members were closer to like 2,000 to 3,000.
Okay.
So it's not a lot. She was the face of that organization and she ran it. All of her family members were also involved. Her son Garth and her daughter Robin. They each had positions, senior positions, and they all lived together. They're all
still living together.
well into adulthood. Madalyn also created an atheist radio program, which was on more than 150 radio stations, and she hosted a cable show called the American Atheist Forum that was aired on more than 140 cable systems. They moved the headquarters of the American Atheist to Texas, partially because Texas was such a Christian state.
Yeah.
Speaking of Texas, the fuck is going on down there?
I don't know.
So that is why they moved there, was because it was a place where they would have just ample opportunities to sue.
Yikes.
They were suing about nativity scenes in the Capitol Rotunda. They were suing about the requirement to have politicians be Christian and like all of this stuff, you know? Madalyn eventually actually became the speechwriter. This was in quotations everywhere, so I don't think she actually did write the speeches. But
okay.
For Larry Flynt.
Really?
Do you remember who Larry Flynt was?
Yes.
Yeah, he was the founder of Hustler.
Mm-hmm. And
he ran for president.
He did?
Yeah. So she was his speechwriter when he was running for president.
Interesting.
Yeah. But Madalyn is obviously a problematic person, right?
Yeah.
For all of the reasons we've already talked about. But also, she said, like, I was like reading some of the stuff she wrote and I was always like, is that racist? I think that might be a little racist. Is that anti-Semitic? I think that's a little anti-Semitic. And then I found.
Oh no.
She promoted Holocaust denial in the American Atheist magazine. she claimed that the total number of Jewish victims during the Holocaust was between 1 and 1.5 million, not the 6 million that had been reported. She wrote, quote, "The good news for the Jews of the world is that they did not lose as many of the clan as they thought they had lost."
Yikes.
I literally wrote,
Oh my God, it's written on the paper. It says
yikes.
Yeah. Not a fan of that.
And like, so that issue of the magazine was from 1989.
Okay.
And so I was like, well, I'm curious about the rest of the magazine. Like, this Holocaust denial part is bad, but like, what else are you publishing in this thing? I just want to get a vibe for it. And there were a lot of like illustrations in it, and they were like, they were bad. And there was definitely in that same issue a very racist column that I will not even talk about.
Okay.
And I was like, she didn't write that one, but she published it.
Yeah.
So yeah, didn't love it.
That's disappointing.
It's fucking disappointing. Yeah, I would agree. There was also something hinky going on at the American Atheists.
Your body language and your voice keeps getting like a little higher, a little scrunchier, a little cringier.
So Madalyn was always asking for money, for donations, and
Did she pay taxes?
I don't know how to say this, but one of her problems were televangelists, and I think that's who she was too. I think she was like, I could do that, but for atheism. And so she was always asking for donations, insisting that the organization was cash poor. And if you looked at the books, it absolutely was. There was never any like real money. But Madalyn and John both drove Mercedes.
Oh no.
And Robin had a Porsche.
They ran with it and got sick with it, didn't they?
They had a house that they paid for in cash that was like $1 million. I don't know. You do
got
the math.
got the better of them.
Madalyn also pulled some really wild legal stunts. Like, really wild. Like, you remember Larry... So, did you watch The People versus Larry Flint, that movie back in the day?
When it like came out, yeah, long time ago.
I remember in the movie that Larry Flint went to jail for, I think, obscenity or whatever, profanity or whatever it was. So when he went to jail, she tried to use the courts to become the like person who ran his empire. That she was entitled to it.
In what way? Did they have a relationship or are they?
Well, kind of, you know, she like worked with him. She wrote articles for him and whatever, but I'm like, no.
You can't just take someone's
empire. Then she did the same thing to a man named James Hervey Johnson. He published an atheist magazine in San Diego called The Truth Seeker, and that was probably the most popular atheist like publication. And she printed stock certificates that showed that she owned enough stock to be the president. And so therefore she was the one who should be taking over the Truth Seeker. And they countersued her with racketeering charges.
Ooh, that's serious.
Eventually, though, it ended in a mistrial. So either, like, I think both sides didn't have enough.
They just let it go.
Like, no. Madalyn stepped down as president of the American Atheists and put Garth in charge. Insiders said he was incompetent and loud and abrasive.
This is like turning into a shit show.
She was still like running the show in the background, I guess, and was still the face and the voice of the organization. So she was still the one who did media and stuff. But
I'm just like picturing them in this house, all of them, by the way, the whole family. And she's like screaming and, Garth, you didn't take out the garbage again.
He did not do well. And John and Robin were eventually sued by the IRS for $1.5 million in back taxes. So things were kind of falling apart for them.
If you're going to preach about people being accountable financially, which they should be, you should also be holding yourself to those standards.
Yeah, pay your fucking taxes.
Pay your fucking taxes.
So allegedly, Madalyn and her adult children were socking away money in secret bank accounts in New Zealand to get away from having to pay taxes.
Yikes. Sounds like the money got the better of him.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it seems like they were corrupted by money.
Yeah.
So on August 28th, 1995, American Atheist employees showed up to work and found a note taped to the door that said, "The Murray O'Hare family has been called out of town on an emergency basis. We do not know how long we will be gone at the time of writing this memo." And of course, they were all shocked and angry. AA employees received a few phone calls from Robin and John for the first month. And then after September 28th, no one heard from any of the Murray O'Hares again. So a lot of folks believed that the family had skipped the country to go to New Zealand and were living off the money that they'd been siphoning from the organization all along because there was no extradition from New Zealand. And it said there was at least $600,000 in the New Zealand account.
It's a lot of money.
Yeah, and this is in 1995, so it's a lot of money. But some staff members weren't convinced based on like the way Robin was on the phone. Like she was like clearly very distraught. The way that she answered questions was not right. Like they just had a vibe something was not right. And they went to the police, who was like, I don't know. They're all grown adults and they can disappear if they want.
Jeez. Okay.
And besides, she's the most hated woman in America, especially in Texas. So they had no desire.
They had no...
So a reporter named John McCormick and a private investigator, Tim Young, were the two people who were like, I think there's more to this. Tim Young, the private detective, thought he was going to spend a week on it. He'd find them and it'd be fine. Like he'd be done. But that is not how it happened. They are the two that eventually cracked the case open. And they don't get enough credit for it because even now, if you open up the Wikipedia entry, they talk about the FBI and the police, but nobody had an interest. They like literally brought them the whole case with evidence and they were like, here you go. So in February of 1993, we're going to go backwards in time.
Okay.
So they disappeared in 95. February of 1993, Madalyn hired an ex-felon named David Waters to work at American Atheists. She was fond of hiring former felons, which I actually find to be an admirable thing to do. David was fired by Madalyn after she found that he had stolen $54,000 from the association.
Oh, goodness.
She took him to court, which obviously he didn't love, and she won. But she also did like a letter to the membership in the magazine, just dragging his ass.
Yikes.
She detailed his past history as a thief and then told about an incident that I guess he had told her about or she found out about somehow in court's papers. In 1977, he beat his own mother and then urinated on her face.
Gross.
And it was this article that enraged him. And his girlfriend said in court that like he talked daily about the fantasies he had about torturing and killing her.
Jeez.
So David recruited 2 accomplices to help him kidnap the O'Hares. For a month, they kept the 3 family members locked in a hotel room.
So they had the mom, they had Robin, and they had Garth? Okay.
And they kept them in a hotel room. And the whole reason it was a whole month was because it turned out that getting all of this money from New Zealand to the United States was not easy. So they had to it couldn't come in one installment. It had to come in a couple of installments and there had to be time passing and he had to go to New Jersey. They had to take Garth to New Jersey from Texas to pick up some of this gold because that was the place they had to go. And the other thing is that they wanted it all in gold coins. David and the 2 other accomplices, they wanted it in gold coins.
This is crazy.
Oh, it's absolutely bananas. I don't know why he just didn't have it in cash. But whatever. So they wanted it in gold coins. And so that was a whole other thing. He had to go to this pawn shop.
I was going to say that the only reason I could see that is you're pawning it.
Well, he had to go to get the gold coins. He had to go to this gold dealer, this, kind of a skeezy gold dealer, right? Anyway, by that point, Madalyn wasn't in very good health anyway. She had diabetes. Both of her feet were swollen. She was basically usually in a wheelchair at this point. But apparently she hadn't lost that vim and vigor And she had been arguing with one of the kidnappers, like pushing his buttons constantly, like
Oh, no.
getting into arguments and fights with him. And eventually he beat her, I believe, is what really happened. So David Waters, Gary Paul Carr, and Danny Fry eventually killed all 3 members of the family and dismembered them.
Oof.
Fearing that Danny Fry would rat them out, David and Gary killed Danny and dismembered him as well. His body was found in 1995 with his hands and head missing. He wasn't identified for more than 3 years, and if it wasn't for the private detective Tim Young, he probably would have never been identified, but that was the thing that really cracked the case open. So Tim Young and the reporter McCormick dug into this case until they had solidly put together what they believe had happened, and eventually were able to convince the police to investigate the missing people and David Waters. Once they had enough on him, Waters was arrested and agreed to show police where he had buried the bodies. This is probably the best, most ironic part. Of the $600,000 that David stole from the Murray O'Hare family, $420,000 of it was stolen from him by a group of thieves who broke into the storage unit where he'd put the gold.
Oh my gosh. You can't make this shit up.
It was like teenagers too. It was like a little like theft ring, and they were just like breaking into storage lockers.
And they find
and
gold.
they find $420,000 in gold. Gary Carr was sentenced to life in prison in August of 2000, and David Waters was found guilty of kidnapping, robbery, and murder. But because of his cooperation, he was given only 20 years.
That's not a lot for murdering
killing
3 people.
4 people.
4 people.
Because of Danny Fry, too.
Yeah.
He also was ordered to pay $543,665 to the estates of John and Robin and Madalyn, and to the United Secularists of America. He died of lung cancer in 2003, serving just 3 years in prison.
Jeez.
I had hoped, honestly, when I started this story, I had hoped that what I would be able to do was vindicate Madalyn. Like, she should have never been called the most hated woman in America.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe partially I did that. But I think she was more complicated than all of those things. I really did have this idea that because she was a woman, she had been maligned.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that it was this sexist and overly conservative country, this vicious media that went after her, and it was like they were all just out to get her. And to some extent, I do think that's true.
Mm-hmm. I think there's a piece there, yeah.
But she was also vicious, and she would take any opportunity she could to malign and degrade and berate people. So I'm going to actually tell you one last story about her. One time she was a guest on a radio show, and a guy named Roy Torcaso, who had been a plaintiff in an earlier church versus state case that had basically paved the way for her case, called in while she was on this radio show. And this was her response. Roy Torcaso, I wouldn't talk to you like I wouldn't talk to a dead dog. You're one of the most despicable persons who has ever lived or breathed. I think it is astonishing that you would even have the nerve enough to call up this station and say that you even knew me remotely. I think that there is nothing that you have ever done that has been honest, sincere, or a credit to humanity, to your position, to anything at all. I am thoroughly and completely ashamed of you. The host tried to allow Roy to speak, and Roy began to say that he had tried to apply to become a member of the American Atheists, but Madalyn cut him off and was yelling, "That's right, and I refused it. I would rather put a dead dog into our organization."
Whoa.
That's Madalyn.
That's a piece of work right there.
I don't actually know how I feel about Madalyn, but I'm glad I know her story better.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because it's almost exclusively told as a true crime tale now.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that erases the real work that she did and the complications that she presented America and women and feminism and all of these things that we talk about on here. I think you don't have to like her or even admire her necessarily, but I think it's important to acknowledge that she did something important.
Exactly. Yeah. To respect that work at least.
Yeah.
Sounds like Madalyn got the best of Madalyn.
Gosh, I think what was hard is that so many people afterwards were like, good.
Yeah.
Good riddance.
Mm-hmm.
She deserved it.
That is a bonkers story.
It is.
It's freaking wild.
Start to finish.
My hands are sweating.
Well, it's also because we're still in this fucking hot box. Needs to become fall soon.
That was great. I was really that was way more than I even, because I knew some of it. As soon as you said the most hated, I was like, oh, the woman who took prayer out of the classroom. Yeah, because I had heard of that, and but I didn't know all that other stuff.
There's a lot there.
Yeah.
I mean, I didn't even, honestly, that this is still the surface. Like I had too much. I had to try to narrow it down, and I swear to God, I narrowed it down. Lucas is sometimes like, you don't have to tell everything. I was like, I didn't. So I got my my information from a biography by Brian F. LeBeau that was published in 2003 called The Atheist, Madalyn Murray O'Hair. I used the Texas State Historical Association biography by Catherine Lancaster. There was some really great articles by Texas Monthly. However, I would say there was a lot of bias against her in them. I had to weed through that. But the one I used was called Has Madalyn Murray O'Hair Met Her Maker by Michael Hall. As I mentioned before, I did use the August 1989 issue of American Atheist magazine on Scribd.com. I didn't get to include anything from it, but I want to shout out that there's a really great interview with Playboy magazine that she did in 1965. She talks about sex, and it was great. Obviously, I used some Wikipedia and the YouTube clips of The Tonight Show. And for some of the details of what happened to her and her family, I used Murderpedia.
Excellent work.
Thank you.
What a way to kick off the season.
I know. We got some complicated people mixed with murder and gold. What more could you ask for?
Ooh, well, thank you so much for that episode.
Thank you for listening, and for you all for listening at home as well.
Yeah, we'd also like to thank our editor, Lucas McIntyre.
And Jennifer Finch of L7.
And don't forget to, if you want to be one of our Patreon subscribers, you can find it in our link tree, connected to our Instagram. We would much love the support.
Yes, we would. And you can get access to our bonus episodes for only $3. So, I mean,
why not?
$36 for a whole year? Like you spend more. You spend more on 3 cups of coffee than that. Let's be honest.
All right, till next time, folks.
Goodbye.